Everybody, welcome to another What the Tech. I'm not even sure what episode number this is, Paul. I've lost count at this point. I think it's 89, episode 89. I'm Andrew Zarin. I'm joined by the very blue Paul Thurrott.
By the way, I think it's episode 90.
Is it? It's episode 90.
I believe.
I don't even know.
Hello.
Yes, episode 90. You're absolutely right. Let me take that back. Hey, everybody. Welcome to What the Tech, episode 90. I'm Andrew Zarin. I'm joined by Paul Thurrott.
Hello again.
How you doing, Paul?
I have no further corrections.
I have a lot to say today.
I know.
You know what I have to say, but I'm going to hold back on a lot of the stuff because the secret police will come and take me away tomorrow if I continue going on this rant. But we have a lot to talk about today.
Well, but on the flip side, it will probably appease the people who are tired of us complaining about Android all the time.
Yeah. You know, I read the Steve Jobs book.
Yep.
In its entirety. Mm-hmm. I have to give, I didn't think it would be so honest.
Yes, I'm glad it is.
It's very honest.
I've read every book ever written about this guy. So The first 2/3 of it are all fertile, well-explored territory. No real new news there. I'm most interested in the new stuff, the revelations about his, his health issues, and of course the various product releases that they did over the past 10 years. So
well, I didn't know a lot of the details with the Bill Gates stuff with him.
Yep.
From like the early days when like Bill Gates would tell him he's full of it.
I can't say that there's anything completely new in here. I'm sorry. There are no broad strokes, new things in here. What this book is really good at is filling in lots of little details. We knew, for example, that Steve Jobs had looked at like homeopathic solutions to his cancer problem for 9 months before he finally had surgery. And in the book, they go into much more detail about how that is in fact true. And, here are the details about that stuff. Or the Bill Gates stuff, same thing. And so that stuff is interesting to me.
I didn't know his hygiene was that poor early on. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, no, he was
because I'm fairly new to the whole Apple thing. I mean, I've only had a Mac for about a couple of years.
This is well-traveled material for me. But yeah, I mean, he was born too late, 10 years too late to be a hippie, but he kind of adopted that whole hippie thing well after it had kind of run its course. But he was very taken by the 60s, and I think kind of wished he had grown up.
It was very interesting. At certain portions, and I think I sent you certain things. Like the only time, like there were a lot of stories about him lashing out to people. And like awful stuff. I mean, and we know a lot of it, like sending back the orange juice 6 times because he was convinced that the orange juice is
canned or
from a bottle,
even though they're just giving him the same thing over and over again.
Yeah,
that's an example of someone falling for their own, heroism. Like he is like this perfect, design guy, and he knows that this is, even though it's just the same stuff over and over again. It's just. The sad part of a story like that is that he did stuff like that to his family. He would shun them at the table and barely even acknowledge the existence of one of his daughters. And I don't mean Lisa. I mean one of his newer daughters.
The middle one, right?
Yeah, or the young. I think it's the youngest one actually. But whatever. I mean, it's just such a bad guy. I mean, it's just I think the one thing I hope that comes out of this is that people who idolize him come to understand, as I have about my own idols growing up, that they're not perfect, and that they were people who, like I've said this many times, people who are really, really good at one thing tend to be really, really bad at other things. And in his case, he was a great natural designer of products.
But he was nutty. I mean, that's nutty behavior.
Worse than nutty.
One thing I was thinking, I was talking to a friend that actually read the book alongside me. I mean, we kind of read it at the same pace and we finished around the same pace. And he actually brought up something very interesting. He turned around and said, I wonder if Steve Jobs never got ill and Steve Jobs, continued to run Apple for another 10 or 20 years, what would his legacy have been? Would he have ended up becoming, just an out of control someone that's I don't want to use the wrong words, but like someone like maybe like a Nikola Tesla where he's just so out of his mind.
Yeah. I mean, Steve Jobs was obviously the right guy at the right time for Apple, and it's, I guess, in Apple's third incarnation, and I guess Steve Jobs' second incarnation at Apple. He had the right mix of experience and time to really make a difference. And I will say this, and this is mentioned in the book. There's a passage where I think it's someone from Apple speculates that had he not gotten sick and not had to confront the fact that he was going to die soon, he might not have taken a lot of the chances he took that ended up being very successful for Apple. So looked at in another way, Apple's success might have been much more moderate if he hadn't been confronted by this problem. I think the tragic thing here is simply that he didn't react correctly to this disease right away, because he'd probably still be with us.
He'd probably still be with us because he delayed it by a number of months, 8 months. He delayed getting the proper treatment to get the homeopathic.
Stupid. And there were so many people telling him how dumb that was. And, for a guy who was as smart as him to be that dumb is hard to take. And an example of how his own reality distortion field apparently included himself, that his reaction to bad things was just to ignore them. And that's not what you do with something like cancer.
It's very interesting. I mean, I think it was well written. I was actually, again, I'm going to say it again, I was very surprised how honest and open the book was about Steve and the way he's been with his family and with his friends and with his colleagues. It doesn't paint him in the greatest picture. I thought it was a little bit more honest than it would be.
Yeah, it was very honest. I mean, that's the way he is. And I'm actually glad it was that honest, because there are so many stories about this guy. And the one thing that, the one little myth about Steve Jobs that was nicely bursted by this book was this notion that he had somehow matured and calmed down as he got older. And that is absolutely not the case.
Well, he was screaming on his deathbed. He was yelling at people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was just a raging, jerk. I mean, most of the time. And it's sad. It's sad that, in his recovery periods, he is energized only by work things. He's all sullen around his family, and then Tim Cook shows up at his house, and all of a sudden he's animated and has lots of energy and he can get stuff done. I mean, what must that be like for his family? He had told the author of the book that one of the things he wanted to do with this book was give his kids a way to know who he was, which is sad on two levels, because one, he wasn't such a great guy, and B, they never, why wouldn't you just, why would you not be that way with your kids naturally and, do things with them or spend time with them in ways that were meaningful? I mean, it was just, that bit of it was sad, and again, I think it's just an important wake-up moment for a lot of people who get a little too caught up in this person as if he was some kind of a great guy.
I mean, for technology, yes, he was great for technology.
In other words, he was an awesome inventor and designer, and you cannot overstate his impact on this industry. I mean, there's just no way to do it. I mean, he's absolutely. It was just everything else that was horrible.
Yeah.
It's too bad. I mean, it's too bad. I had written something about Steve Jobs' inability to give to charity in a news article, and somebody said, the guy's barely in his grave, and you're already, jumping all over him. To which I responded, when else would I think of this guy so much as now? I mean, this is the time everyone is turning their attention to this guy. And, one of those things I look for in this book was.
Well, in the book, in the book, they even say that he did not want to give to charity.
Oh, didn't give to charity, and belittled his wife's efforts at charity, and purposefully never visited the charitable organizations that she was part of.
Yeah.
So, I guess in this case, here's an example of me not needing to apologize, because he was even worse than I thought he was. I mean, it's just, it's tragic. He was also very greedy. People who love Steve Jobs, who know nothing about him, will exult in the fact that this guy supposedly made $1 a year, when in fact he was going back to the Apple board on several occasions trying to get more money from them in these secretive fashions that, almost got them in trouble with the SEC and, yada, yada, yada. He was always asking for more money. And then he was also kind of a jealous kind of petty guy, and some of those times when he was out on medical leave, Tim Cook would do a good job, and he actually would get jealous because he had this notion, oh my God, this company can exist without me. And he actually got kind of mad at the other people, because they were doing a good job, which of course is what he set them up to do.
It was a very interesting management way of doing management. Listen, for what it is, I mean, if you look at it for what it is, I mean, it's an awful way of treating your
It's
Your
impossible.
employees.
The problem with
Yeah.
Steve Jobs is that there's nothing to learn. You, as a manager of people, cannot read this book or learn anything about this man and then apply those things to your own work. It's impossible because no one is actually just like this guy. He is so hardcore about his attitudes, about everything, that he just lives his life that way to every little weird detail. It is inconceivable. And it kind of it ties back to that thing I think we talked about when he was first, either when he left Apple or maybe when he died, where, I said a lot of people are giving this advice to Apple, like, just do what Steve would do. And
No, totally wrong.
It's not possible. And
Yeah.
actually in the book, there's even a quote from Steve Jobs himself to Tim Cook, who said, don't think like I do. Don't try to anticipate what I would do. I picked you people because you're the right people. You just do the right thing.
Well, I think we also, a lot of people forget that Steve was not a programmer. Steve was not a designer. Steve just had very good taste.
He also
when it came
didn't
to the
invent
product.
any of this stuff.
He didn't invent any of it, no.
The people, is another huge misconception about him, that he came up with the design of the iMac or he came up with the design of the iPhone.
No, it was Johnny Ives.
It doesn't almost matter who it was specifically, because the truth was people would present him with things and he would say yes to this, no to this, yes to this, no to this. And then eventually, he did have ideas, vague ideas, and then people would have to turn them into actual products. But I mean, more often than not, of course, this guy was just saying no. And don't get me wrong, there's a huge gift to that. But, in this desire to kind of prop this guy up, I think we start to exaggerate the things that he did. And you also have these crazy stories. This has nothing to do with the book, but you saw these stories where, Apple, he left Apple with a 5-year plan of products or whatever it was. And it's like, oh, seriously. I mean, it's so ludicrous. Like, it's the modern or the real world equivalent of the Encyclopedia Galactica. Like every year, the Steve Jobs hologram is going to appear and say, it is now July 2012. You should be releasing the iPhone 5. And here are the features. There's no, it's not like that, So I just
one thing I picked up from the book is that Steve Wozniak is still working on the Apple II.
Yeah.
What you notice? Like he was working on that Apple II for many years.
Right.
And I found that funny because like they'll be at like Steve leaving Apple. The Macintosh is out. Steve leaves Apple. Wozniak is still working on the Apple II.
Sure.
Which I found that really funny. And listen, and I don't want it to seem like we're attacking a guy that just passed away, because we're not. We're reflecting on the book, and the book did a great job at showing that he was a human being, and he wasn't this messiah that people have painted him out to be. And the book does a great job, and I really hope that many of these Apple employees read this book, because it shows that his way was not necessarily the right way. It was his team that was creating the products, and he had a great team with him. And I think in the end, he did the right thing by setting up this team that'll be able to continue Apple's legacy for many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, he was great at picking the right technologies, materials, products, people, everything. He did a very, very good job at that. I'm particularly interested because of what I do in the Microsoft stuff that's in the book, because there is that back and forth with Gates and Jobs where they talk about how, we thought in the beginning that only your approach made sense. Now we can see both approaches have some validity to them. And, they kind of go back and forth on the different approaches there. And I kind of like that stuff because it's far more even-handed than, these things tend to be in the tech blogosphere now, where it's very partisan. And but again, people, because I am a Windows guy, I mean, people sort of think that I'm like, the cheerleader on the Microsoft side of the bench. And that's not the case. I mean, I'm always...
Well, you're critical of Ballmer.
I'm just fair. I try to be fair across the board. I should say. I can't say I am fair. I mean, I try to be as fair as I can across the board. So, I like good technology. I spent much of today writing an article about some iPod and iTunes stuff, for example, that hasn't been published yet. But, I don't get a kick out of when Apple loses something. I don't feel bad when Microsoft loses something. I don't, I'm more concerned that the right technology wins. I feel bad when good technology fades away. I feel bad when bad technology succeeds, Can
you give me an example of just good technology that just faded away and it could have been something big and it wasn't?
Oh, I have a million.
Give me some.
I'll talk just on the Microsoft side because that's what I'm most familiar with. Microsoft was very early to the game with software that you could use on your TV set. One of the big decisions they made early on was, do we make this thing a PC or do we make it a device like the Xbox? And at the time, the Xbox they had was that first Xbox. Because of the relative maturity of the PC ecosystem compared to that for the devices, they went the PC route. And what they came up with was something that eventually became called Windows Media Center. And Media Center is beautiful software, but it's just been hobbled by all of the kind of junk that goes around with the PC and the complexity of having a PC in the living room and the weird notion of rebooting the TV because something goes wrong, which is essentially what happens. And then the retroactive kind of changes you have to make to it to address those problems, like the complexity of adding Media Center extenders to the mix. Where we'll put this thing with a cable box converter in your home office, and then we'll put an extender out in your living room. And what gets lost in all this junk is that people don't use this stuff because it's too complex.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And who's using it? I mean, who are they?
Enthusiasts are using it.
Enthusiasts are using it, but that's not, you're never going to have major success if that's who your market is.
So one of the things, people sort of forget the heredity, if you will, of this kind of stuff. But Microsoft's UI for Windows Media Center, which eventually, by the way, begat such things as the UI for its portable Media Center, the UI for its Zune hardware and then software, and then the UI for Windows Phone, and now for Windows 8. These things all kind of go in a transition. But over on the Apple side, they looking at the same issues. Apple at the time only had Macs, so they made some software for the Macs called Front Row. And Front Row was some of the most horrible software ever created. It was basically a weird front-end shell for all of the digital media programs. So you would do something like play a video, and iTunes would actually run in the background. You just weren't aware that it was happening. It was horribly written and designed. But the UI itself, and when I say designed, I mean from a technology infrastructure, not the UI. The UI was a blatant ripoff of Windows Media Center. It was
bad. I mean, it was
a blatant
awful.
ripoff. The interesting thing is that if Apple eventually got it right, and how they got it right was they put that software, an updated version of it, on the Apple TV, which was very successful from a ease of use standpoint. And of course, Apple being Apple, that they've simplified and simplified and simplified, and now they have this hockey puck shaped device. It costs a size device. It costs $99. You plug it into your HDTV. It only has like two things you can plug into it, and it just works. And it is in many ways the sort of spiritual successor of the Media Center, but made by Apple, and because Apple tends to do those consumer products better than Microsoft does. And that's an example where Microsoft had it first. They did a good job, but they were saddled by that PC stuff that they just can't seem to escape on the Microsoft side.
Now, we since you brought up the Apple TV part in the book, we hear about that mythical creature as the actual Apple TV, a TV that's made by Apple, and Steve Jobs says he solved he fixed it. He fixed the TV.
He cracked it. I think
he cracked it. I cracked it.
It's such a great thing to say without proving that you've done it.
You know what? I've always said TVs are just, they could use a change. They could use a revision. I would love to have some sort of smart TV that actually works properly. But, and this is my concept on this, and many people are thinking is, those Apple displays are very expensive. Are they gonna blow them up and sell you a $5,000 46-inch TV?
Because I don't know off the top of my head how much this thing costs.
I mean, they're beautiful. They're beautiful displays. I don't think anybody could deny that these displays are just really nice
but you
looking.
do what everyone does, which is you look at it and you say, "Wow, this thing is really beautiful,"
and you don't buy it.
And then you realize it's twice as much as the Dell, which is almost exactly the same, and you go buy that. Bose, the makers of the high-end stereo equipment, speakers and whatnot, have something that I think is like a prototype of what an Apple television set could look like. It's called the Video Wave Entertainment System.
Video Wave, I'm going to look it up.
It cost about $5,500. And it is, your typical Bose product. It probably has excellent speakers kind of built into it, even though it's very thin. It probably sounds great. It has a super simple remote. The thing is, let me see. I got to see how big the screen is. This is what I'm wondering about.
I see this. I'm looking at it.
It is, how big is the screen? Do you see
46.
46-inch. You could walk into Costco and buy a 46-inch HD TV today for about $500 or $600 tops, probably less. So you know, this is. I have a feeling if Apple were to make a TV, no matter how great it was, it would probably be somewhere in this kind of stratosphere. And then, of course, over time, it would come down as these things do. But
or maybe we're wrong. I mean, maybe they'll figure out a way to market these things at an affordable cost. I think TV prices, people aren't. And before I would do this all the time. When I bought my plasma TV in 2003. I spent $7,000 on it because I wanted the highest end Hitachi plasma TV that was made at the time.
Right.
The thing is extremely thick, and I have it on my wall. It's a great TV. I mean, it's a total enthusiast TV. But nobody's going and spending $3,000. I mean, some people are, but not the majority. Everybody's
for 46 inch.
Not for 46 inch.
I mean,
no.
You could buy 5 TVs of that size for that much money. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I was insane to do it, but I bought my Samsung for $700, and it's there. You know, it was a higher end Samsung, and it's a 46 inch LCD, and I'm happy with it. I don't think anybody's going to go out and spend $3,000 or $4,000 on a TV. That is not going to happen.
Oh, see, but now that you've said something that is such an absolute, we have to remember we're talking about Apple here. So, Apple has an enchanted hold over consumers that defies all reason. You know, I've always thought that logic could win the day, but Apple has proven me wrong because logically, almost none of their products make any sense. I saw an insane article in the New York Times the other day. I think it was on Sunday by this, you know, he's like such an Apple goon who writes for the New York Times. It was saying that, you know, Apple, part of, you know, lowering prices is like Apple's new strategy, and that's how, you know, they're going to differentiate or something. And it's like, give me a break. You know, Apple always starts, Apple's products are still always more expensive than the competition. They always are. Apple succeeds because people perceive their products to be of a higher quality. People pay more to get more. And if anyone could sell a $3,000 or $4,000 46-inch TV, I would argue Apple would be the only company. I bet Bose sells 2 or 3 of those things every year. There's no way people are buying that thing in volume. But if Apple could sell one for half of that, and it would only be twice as much or maybe 3 times as much as your typical Vizio at Costco.
So you're talking like maybe $2,000.
Yeah, I bet that would sell them.
That would sell, yeah.
But what does that mean? It's almost not worth debating because we don't know what an Apple TV means. You know, is it an HD TV that has that Apple TV software built into it? If so, I mean, whatever. You know, you can add an Apple TV to your television today for $99. I mean, integrating that stuff into the frame doesn't buy you anything. I mean, there's no huge advantage to that. So,
and who knows if it'll ever come out? I mean, this is coming out. You know, this is in Steve's book. It's a different leadership now at this point, and they might turn around and be like, "Listen, this is not going to work." We don't want to get into
Steve Jobs actually had some harsh words for Tim Cook in this book, which, you know, I found very, very interesting. And in fact, it was in response to someone had said to him, you know, how well Apple did in his absence. And he kind of said, well, Steve, you know, Tim's a good guy. He's steadier than I am, very calm, but he's not a product guy. And that was a little dig, you know, meant to remind people that, you know, Steve Jobs still had a reason, you know, to be there and was still a valuable part of the team and so forth. But I think the truth is Steve Jobs was maybe most valuable to Apple in his dealings with other people at other companies because he could be very persuasive and very aggressive in ways that I just don't see Tim Cook or anyone. And this is not a dig at Tim Cook. I think Tim Cook's a great guy. I just think he doesn't have that something that Steve Jobs had. No one does. So that's not it's not a problem. No one has it. But it's going to be a problem for Apple going forward because I think Steve Jobs could walk into certain situations and get things done where no one else on earth can. And
well, it's a very difficult market. The TV market is not like the computer market. I think it's a very different market. So for them to penetrate that,
but maybe they make it their market. You know, the market for smartphones is very different from the PC market. And they did very well there and continue, and will, you know, in foreseeable future, will always do well there. So
one thing was fascinating, and then I want to move on to some of the other topics. But I really found the hatred towards Android and Google to be very interesting because his entire point is that he got ripped off.
Well, by the way,
they ripped him off. But
this is exactly what I've written, that Android is stolen technology.
Yeah.
And by stolen, I mean a slightly different thing than Steve Jobs does. But I find it very interesting that him and I actually agree on something.
Yeah, that is funny. But that's his point, that, you know, Android was stolen from Apple. Okay, you could, yeah, there are technology and the way that the touch display works and certain features of it. But let's go back to what had happened to Apple in the beginning. I mean, he pretty much took the technology that Xerox was. He kind of bamboozled Xerox into pretty much.
If you're looking for any admission of hypocrisy or irony.
But there was a lot in that book. I mean, there was a ton of hypocrisy. A couple things about Bill Gates was very interesting too. That was, he claimed Bill Gates. I forgot what it was, like something about Bill Gates and how it being unoriginal. And then he turned around and saying, well, he makes the best software for the Mac.
Well, okay, so they had a weird coopetition, kind of a relationship. I mean, Microsoft contributed a lot to the original Mac, was one of the major players creating software for the original Mac. Microsoft propped up Apple when they were at their lowest by promising to continue to release versions of Office and other software for Mac.
You're talking about 96, 97.
Yeah. Apple was instrumental in the creation of Adobe, and Steve Jobs had a great relationship with the founder of Adobe, John Warnock, Warnock, I think is his name. And yet, when it came to Adobe Flash and the kind of stuff that's happened recently, he really turned on Adobe as a rabid dog. And what's interesting is in the book, and I don't know that I ever really drew this as the reason. It kind of shows you how petty he is. But the real reason he hates Adobe is because Adobe was the last major software maker to support OS X with their software. So, and I remember this from the early 2000s when he would be, they'd be talking up OS X during the transition. They would still ship the old OS and the new OS. And they'd always cart out Adobe as, oh, we're still waiting on these guys. Eventually they're going to get on here. And he harbored that grudge for years. And now he's really kind of putting the screws to them, even though when Adobe was not releasing software for OS X, that guy was still at the company. He's only left the company more recently. So he's a very spiteful, vengeful person. It's very interesting. But for whatever it's worth, people perceive there being a real strong anti-Microsoft bias at Apple or with Steve Jobs in particular. And I think accurately, Steve Jobs doesn't like the lack of class or whatever you want to say in Microsoft software. And I certainly get that. But Microsoft did stick by Apple, and for whatever it's worth, I think he legitimately kind of had to give him a pass for that because they did stick by Apple.
And they make good software. I mean, I think Office is phenomenal on the Mac.
Well, yeah, I mean, in some ways it almost doesn't matter, but yeah.
But let's compare what iTunes is on Windows.
Oh God, please. Well, so there's a line in this book too about I believe it was a Q&A between the author and Jobs where Apple very recently apparently considered putting their iTunes software on Android.
Yeah.
And then finally said, you know what? Screw those guys. And
his quote was, why would I want to make Android users happy?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He goes, I want to make Android users sad, so we're not going to do that. So good for him on that one. But then I think the guy asked him about iTunes on Windows, and he said, we just did that to sell more iPods. And it kind of shows, it's sad because there are so many more people using iTunes on Windows just because of the sheer number of users there are. And they're forced to put up with this real second-class software because you can tell Apple just doesn't give a crap about it. It's just so horrible, the software. I mean, you have to use it just to use their awesome devices.
Fascinating guy.
Yeah.
in every meaning of the word, just fascinating.
Well, he's so sharp. That's what I mean. You could try to emulate him, but you couldn't do it because the second you try to emulate a guy like that, you're not anything like him.
No, there'll never be another one.
You couldn't be that way. You couldn't drive around without a license plate in your car because you just don't believe in that kind of authority. You would just pay the tickets.
That's nutty.
Or park in handicap spots and just put up with that because I don't care. I don't. You can't be that absolute, and that's what made him. That's part of what made him the way he was. So you have to kind of take the good with the bad.
Do you think it was timing for Apple, like that he saved Apple? Do you think it was? I mean, a lot of it was that Microsoft, that $150 million investment by Microsoft, but. Do you think if it was somebody else that was a decent leader, it would have been what it is now, or do you think
Apple would be gone? In 1996, when they were going to buy for a BOS, which I thought was an excellent choice, and they had Jean-Louis Gasset was their CEO and the founder of that company, also a former Apple executive. I thought that was a great choice, but in retrospect, If they had done that, Apple wouldn't exist today. Emilio still would have been would have been the CEO for a few years more, but maybe guess they would have taken over, and they would have slid into irrelevance just like B did, and that would have been horrible. So even though I sort of thought at the time this was a technically excellent choice, the software that they got from Next, which had done like nothing, I mean, it had gone nowhere. They sold in the thousands of units over a decade. Is now the basis for everything they're doing. It's the basis for Mac OS X. It's the basis for the iOS software that drives iPads and iPhones and iPod Touches. I mean, it's astonishing.
And B's still around, by the way.
B's still around?
Yeah. It's called Haiku.
Haiku. Are you sure about that? I thought Palm bought B.
The Haiku project. Their last alpha was in June. They had a stable build come out in June.
Okay, but the company's not around.
The company's not around now.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But we were talking about, technology or products that could have possibly been but fell apart. And WebOS is one of those things that I honestly thought would have been a major player.
Well,
I liked it.
I liked it too, but there was one thing I'll mention that gave me a clue early on that this thing wasn't going to succeed, and then
that had the palm
stuff in the
seal
book about it.
That it was a palm.
No, it was that John Rubinstein, who was the iPod guy at Apple originally, ran into problems with Steve Jobs because he was clashing with Johnny Ives, and Jobs would always take Ives' opinion, no matter what. And Rubinstein felt like he was being undercut. And so he left Apple, supposedly to retire, and then he went back to, he went to Palm, and then he was behind WebOS. And one of the original WebOS demonstrations, like the product launches, it's John Rubinstein doing the keynote. And it is a carbon copy of a Steve Jobs keynote, except that the guy who's doing the talking is not Steve Jobs. And it kind of goes back to that quote I've used, why would anyone want to buy a product that looks just like an Apple product, but is not an Apple product,
Yeah.
And so he even tried to copy the presentation style.
And it's priced as an Apple product.
Yeah, and that was my first warning sign that something was wrong. But the way Jobs described Rubinstein was to say that, this guy doesn't get it. He's from HP. He's got that HP mindset. And what he meant by that was slow moving, designed by a committee, not going to change the world.
Yeah. I want to move on from the Steve Jobs thing. I have to.
We could talk about this
I know.
for 2 hours.
For my
it's
sake,
fascinating.
It is. But you know what else? I'll say one more thing. His soft spot for HP.
I know. Well, his soft spot for the legacy of HP.
Yeah.
I mean, I in the same way that I think a lot of people idolize Jobs today, and what they're really idolizing is the idea of Steve Jobs, because the more you look into this, the more you realize horrible guy. HP today is a boring computer conglomerate. There's nothing exciting happening there. They're a huge company and they make money. Big deal.
Like an IBM.
So does Exxon. Who cares? So Steve, but that was not the HP that kind of pioneered Silicon Valley 30 years ago or 40 years ago. And that was the HP that he knew growing up. And there were stories in the book where he contacted the CEO and the guy gave him a part he needed to make a thing. And, back then you could walk into a company in Silicon Valley and actually see the people that were running the show, and it was easy to do. There's an incident very recently where Steve Jobs was complaining about his inability to reach, I think it was a record industry executive. So the record industry executive tried to reach him at work, and he actually got a request, but he said, you have to give us a request in writing and fax it to us.
Yeah.
And so Steve, so he said to Steve Jobs, see what it's like at your company? It's the same thing. And of course, Silicon Valley today is a much different place than it was 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. So. Well, here in New York, they're trying to really push it here in New York now.
Push.
Like a Silicon Valley of New York.
Yeah, like the startup mentality, and
yeah. So. Listen. I hope, because it would create jobs and it would be great for us and it would be great for me, because I'm all alone here. Doing this.
Well, remember, in the 70s, a lot of the computer industry stuff was on the East Coast, and there was Wang and Digital in the Boston area. We had that sort of Silicon Valley East kind of thing going on here.
Upstate was a big chip manufacturing place.
Yeah, New York and the New York area had IBM. And then you also had companies like Commodore were in Pennsylvania, and so there was a lot of this stuff on the East Coast, and there was a kind of an East Coast versus West Coast mentality. And I think the Silicon Valley culture today is a byproduct of companies like HP, and then also the small startups, companies like Atari and Apple, of course, companies like that. And so obviously the West Coast stuff is what has lasted. You can drive up and down Silicon Valley. I mean, I'm sorry, Route 128 here in the Boston area. And you'll see the signs for high tech companies, but they're all companies like Microsoft, Oracle, Adobe. They're West Coast companies that just have sales offices here.
Yeah. Nokia World is tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, 4 a.m.
Yeah,
Right?
so I'm going to just wake up and see what happened. I guess there's no way I'm getting up.
Paul, 4 a.m. We're waking up doing a live stream, live coverage of
okay,
it.
okay. I'll put the webcam in my room.
Yeah.
Have the alarm go off.
Oh my God! So Nokia World, 4 a.m. and couldn't they done it a little later for the rest of the world? I mean, that's a little selfish, London.
Yeah, 4 a.m. Yeah, so it's like 10 or 9. Must be 9 a.m. their time.
So Nokia is going to unveil 3 new Windows phones.
Okay.
We've seen 2 of them. Actually, if we go based on all of the shots, one of them is based on the N9.
I've seen one in person, by the way.
You have.
I did.
Can you say?
Very briefly?
Is it the one that you tweeted out?
What did I say? Did I tweet it out?
Yeah, it was last week.
I don't know. What did I tweet? I don't know.
Let's see. I'm trying to find. Well, last week there was
It
one that
happened
was
at
leaked.
Build. I ran into an executive from Nokia.
Well, there was one last week that really looked like the N9.
Yes.
And the screen kind of comes up a little bit. It's like an elevated screen.
Oh, I see. It appears to hover over the case.
Yeah.
So it has an awesome kind of metal-looking case. Yeah.
Okay, so they have that one, and I'm assuming that's going to be their high-end one. And then they have 2 other ones. I forgot the name of them already.
Yeah. Okay.
What was the name? It was like the 800 and the 750.
It was like the name of an alien race from the Star Trek TV series.
Lenio or something.
The Ulgens.
Now I got to find this thing.
I got to find this thing.
So they're releasing 3, which I didn't know they were going to do 3. I thought they would have one big one.
Okay, so I knew there would be multiple devices.
Lumia, the Lumia 800 and the 710.
Yeah.
So I guess those are going to be the lower end ones compared to the N9 version of it. I would like the N9, and I think I'm going to go with that if it ever comes to Verizon.
Yeah. I will buy that phone wherever it is available in the United States. So if I have to switch carriers to do it, I'm going to do that.
I know a lot of people are waiting for this phone. A lot of people are saying, well, this is going to be the phone that Windows, really makes Windows Phone. But do you think a lot of people are going to go out and get this phone because of the hype around it and because of Nokia's great hardware?
I don't think anyone knows anything about Nokia in this country. I think one of the big tricks for these guys is for them to recapture like 30 devices trilling in the background. Is for them to recapture the excitement that they already have internationally. In the U.S., they're seriously.
Busy man, Paul.
I don't know, what is this?
It's your alarm. You set it at the wrong time.
I apparently have to record a podcast with Andrew 47 minutes ago. Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah,
all right, so anyway, the U.S., no one knows anything about Nokia. So what's going to sell these phones is people seeing it. And that's the one thing, I only got a very quick flash of it, but I've been told this by people who've seen it. It's the type of thing when you see it sitting on the table, it's going to distract people. It looks so much nicer than any other phone that I've ever seen that people are going to literally be distracted by it. And I think when you get that in front of people, it's going to generate excitement. I can already, for whatever it's worth, and this is so statistically pointless, but I can tell you on my last couple of trips, I've started seeing Windows Phone out in the world, and I never really saw that before. I mean, until fairly recently, I once saw 2 women using Windows phones in an electronics store in France, which blew my mind.
That's how a dirty joke started in France.
I know. But since then, I was at breakfast, and the woman waiting at the table said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. Is that a Windows Phone?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "How do you like it?" I said, "I love this thing." And she said, "I'm waiting for my cell phone contract to run out so I can buy one of those." And I was like, "What?"
Why?
I couldn't even believe it. I know. I know. It was like a candid camera moment. Like, let's see if we can get Paul to believe this one. No, but I mean, it's interesting to me. I'm starting to see them out in the world, and I think with this phone, it's going to be like I used to do this like when I had when the iBook first came out, or the silver 12-inch version of the PowerBook was like this, and the iPhone was like this when it first came out. people would walk up to you and say, what is that? And they're going to do that. They're going to do that with this Nokia phone. And I think that's how it's going to start to sell. I think people will see this thing and freak out because it really is nice.
It's a really nice looking phone. And I know many people that have done this. Every time you're in the mall, there's always like a kiosk that's selling unsubsidized phones, and they always have a Nokia, like the N8 or the N9, whatever it is.
Oh, they do.
And they're always, I mean, they're such good-looking phones.
But how much are they? They must be like
they're like $700. But I mean,
was it you who was telling me that that's the only way Nokia sells phones? Was that you? Somebody told me this recently, and I don't know.
It might be true because
in the
they're
United
always
States, that is.
Yeah, it might be true. I know they're very expensive, those phones.
Yeah, they can't do that. So that obviously it has to be sold like any other phone.
But I like the phone, and again, I'm still stuck in this situation because I have to get a new phone, and I'm not going to get an iPhone. So I'm already engulfed in the iOS environment with every device I have, so I don't really need an iPhone. And I have an Android now. I'm not happy with any of the phones that they've announced with Ice Cream Sandwich. The Motorola phone does not come with Ice Cream Sandwich, and guess what? It's not. You can't root it because it's Motorola a couple months ago. I don't know if you remember. They said they're not gonna lock the bootloader.
Yeah,
that we're not gonna do that anymore.
Right.
Now they're saying, well, we're not doing it, but it's up to the carrier. So Verizon is going to do it. So now the bootloader's still locked, and I'm not going to wait months to unlock this thing. I still want the ability to know that if they stop updating this phone, I could update it on my own.
Right.
So I'm not going to get the phone, and I'm not going to get the stupid 10-inch phone that they're releasing in a couple of weeks. That phone is ridiculously big. It's 4.65 inches. It's way too big for me.
Sure.
So now I'm probably going to get this if this comes over.
Yeah, I mean, there are some decent Windows phones coming on AT&T, but I'm going to wait until I'm going to see. I hope that part of what happens tomorrow is a very explicit announcement about where we're going to be, which carriers, when. I don't mind waiting till February or March or whatever. I just need to know what's happening, and then I can wait. It's fine.
You think they'll announce it because it's a European conference, so.
I know, but this is really about turning the ship around for them. So I really feel like they need to divulge as much information as possible. It's not enough to say, look, we designed a phone. Yeah. It will be out sometime next year. That's not good enough. It has to happen. So I hope they're very explicit about that. So
we were talking about Apple, and it was the iPod's 10-year anniversary, but it is also Windows XP's.
Yeah.
Well, that sounded wrong. Windows XP's.
You're right.
Yeah, 10-year anniversary. I don't know why. Yeah. It's just
today.
Something happened today, which I cannot believe it's been 10 years for this OS to come out and that it came out, and people are still hanging on for dear life, and they refuse to uninstall XP, and they're sticking with XP.
I know it's a weird thing to celebrate because in many ways, Windows XP will probably always be the most successful version of Windows ever. It's just on the market for so long, and yet. It still ships with IE6. It's crazy. They really want to get businesses off of this. I wrote in a little blog post today or I guess it was an article, but, I still cringe a little bit every time I see that screen, that Irish field with the street cutting through it, or I hear that Windows XP startup sound, which I did recently on a trip. I feel bad for people if you said not because it's horrible, but just because time has moved on and there are more modern things available. And when I go back to XP, I miss stuff.
A lot has changed since XP. I mean, it's they're killing it. I believe in 2014, right? They're going to stop support.
Yeah, this is the weird little. I don't want to call it's not a lie, but I mean, Microsoft will very frequently these days keep reminding people, this thing's going to be out of support soon, but they'll say it in such ways as. At one point this year, it passed the 1,000-day mark. 1,000 days, Windows XP is going to be out of support. And you're like, oh, 1,000 days. Wait a minute, that's like 3.5 years. Like 1,000 days. That's a long time. I mean, 3 years used to be the life cycle of an entire version of Windows. So this OS that came out a decade ago is going to be around for 3 more years. It's like, geez, it's never going away.
I think the transition from XP to 7, 7 is. And you don't really feel it until you go back to a machine that's running 7 XP. And I recently had to fix a laptop for somebody, and they had XP on there, and it just felt really old.
Well, you
And it didn't when Vista was out. You know, a couple years ago when Vista was out, XP did not feel old. I was hanging on to XP because I was having issues with Vista with certain programs I was running.
yeah.
So,
Well, you miss things.
It just feels, it's not as well refined as 7 is, and you kind of forget about that when you're using it in your you're in the environment.
Yep. I just can't use XP. I can't. You know, there was a time period I had bought a netbook, you know, when those were still fairly new. And I think the first one I bought actually came with XP. And I probably put Windows Vista at the time because Vista read really slow. And then I thought, well, I just want to use this thing as sort of a portable movie player. So, you know, who cares? I can put XP on this thing. I couldn't do it. I just could not use it. It was so awful to me to go back to that, you know. And now, of course, you know, compared to 7, it's like I can't find anything in XP. You know, there are these obscure programs that you either have to know the exact command line to run them, or they're buried really deep in the start menu the subfolders. And in Windows 7, you just type, you know, hit the thing and you type your little search and you're off and running, and you don't really think about it anymore. But when that gets taken away, it's like losing a limb. You know, you keep thinking it's there and it's not. I
still have a lot of my old Windows bad habits and it's totally unnecessary to do, but I do it all the time. Like, okay. I don't trust the defrag, and I'll defrag constantly, and you really don't need to defrag.
I'll say I don't do that anymore.
But I defrag all the time.
So I think it was Vista that added schedule defrag, and then I have SSDs and everything now, and you're not supposed to defrag, so I don't even think about that. Actually, that brings up an interesting point, though.
Like, I'll delete the temporary files. Like, I'll do the whole cleanup thing that you used to do in, like, 98. I still have a lot of these old bad habits.
No.
That I still do, and whoever I said, like, you don't need to do that anymore. I'm like, I know it, but I do it anyway.
Yeah, Windows 7 is smart enough to know that you have a SSD and it won't defrag that disk. I just checked to make sure that was true. But you know, I have, like, my desktop has an SSD boot drive and it never runs. But on the data drive, which is a normal 2 terabyte traditional hard disk, that thing runs at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that's great.
Battlefield 3 got released. Paul, you're excited about this, right?
I was.
And then what happened?
I've been playing it today, and it's not. I mean, I feel like criticizing this is a little tough. It's not as graphically excellent as I thought it was going to be. It's fine. It looks good. I mean, but it's not, you know, like plus 10 over the, you know, any other game.
But I didn't know there are almost like two versions of it, right? You have the optional high res texture installation.
Yeah, but it prompts you to do that, so it's not like you could miss it. I mean, you could purposely not do it.
For what reason would you not do it?
I can't think of any reason.
Because it's not like you're installing it on a computer, you know, that you could have different hardware. Like, why wouldn't you install it?
Yeah, one of the things I do for, not so much for performance reasons, but just for, although they boot faster this way, it's almost just for a quietness reason, is you can install games to the hard drive. Mm-hmm. And so all the games that I play regularly, which pretty much amounts to Call of Duty games, I'll always install them to the hard drive before I play them. This game actually comes on 2 discs, which is interesting. Disc 1 is the multiplayer stuff, and disc 2 is single player. And so I installed both to the hard drive. I noticed when I did that the hard disk I have, which has 250 gigs of storage, had over 200 gigs free. So it wasn't like I was using up most of the disk, you know, for something. So I can't imagine why you wouldn't do it. Well, unless, I guess, okay, so actually, now that I've said that, if you had a 4 gig version of the console,
I want to.
Yeah, I think the textures are probably over a gigabyte. So maybe in that case, it's time to get a hard drive.
The installation is 1.5 gigs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess if you have the smaller ones, you're going to have a hard time if you're installing that. And I wonder if that's with the high-res install. Probably not.
No. The high-res install, I think, is 1.5 gigs.
1.5 on top.
Yeah, the game itself is on 2 discs, so it's probably, I mean, it could be as much as 9 gigs.
Yeah. So most people can't install it if you have the lower one.
Right. But, you know, people who tend to play the games like this are going to have the high-end version of the console, which they should anyway. And like I said, it's better just to install these things to the hard drive. You get better performance out of it. And the machine itself isn't as loud because it's not reading stuff off of the disk.
So you're not a fan? You thought the graphics could have been better overall?
based on the trailers I've seen, I thought the graphics were going to be better. To me, they're very comparable to the Call of Duty games, which is fine. I mean, it's fine. The single player game, the previous Battlefield games had sort of a sense of humor to them, and there's a little bit of it in this one, but it's much more along the vibe of a Call of Duty game. And the single player game, if they just called this Modern Warfare 3, it starts with this guy who's being interrogated very much like the last Black Ops Call of Duty game. You're in Iran. The world is at war. I mean, it could very much be Call of Duty. It just feels just like it. And then the multiplayer game, I've only played a few levels, but it's like that Apple thing I keep coming back to. Why would anyone want to buy something that looks like an Apple product but isn't?
Yeah.
Why would anyone want to buy a Call of Duty that was made by someone else and called something different? It's not quite the same. And so whatever, I'm going to I will play through it, the single player, and I'll keep playing the multiplayer. And I've got I got a copy for my son, and I'll keep in touch with him and see what he thinks about it, because he spends a lot of time in Call of Duty as well. But I don't know. Unless whoever really makes Call of Duty now, it's kind of hard to say, but the remnants of Infinity Ward and whatever other studios got involved on that one. I think Raven and Sledgehammer or something. I can't remember. Unless they completely screw it up, which I just don't see happening. I can't imagine Modern Warfare 3 not being better than this. It's early. It's early.
Well, when is it coming? When's the release date for it?
It's out. It's early in my experience playing it. I've only, I'm still early in the game.
No. When did it come out? When was the release date? Like, if you compare, how much of
Battlefield 3 came out today.
And then Modern Warfare came out.
Modern Warfare 3 is on the 8th, I think.
Yeah. So
we get about 2 weeks.
Yeah. Interesting though.
Yeah. So I'll spend a couple. I mean, the thing is, barring some kind of a surprise, I can't imagine that in the next 2 weeks I just don't go back to Black Ops for multiplayer, because I'm just not that excited by what I've seen so far. It's not, and again, don't take that the wrong way. It's like Gears of War 3. It's awesome for what it is, scripted entertainment experience, but it's just the same thing again, and I don't know. So far, I'm not blown away. Interesting,
because I thought you would have liked it.
I do like it. I mean, but I just don't. Even playing multiplayer, the whole time I'm like, this isn't as good as Black Ops. And Black Ops is last year's game.
I think, but Black Ops had it was good. I mean, I even got into it.
I really like Black Ops.
Yeah, I got into it. So I think for many people, it's...
There's some frustrating, one of the problems with these games, the single player games, is you're obviously going from target to target. You have some little goal and you get to it. So they have these checkpoints, and the game saves at a checkpoint. And I've already run into 2 or 3 times where the checkpoint is annoyingly long. You get killed somewhere in the middle, and then you have to go back and redo a bunch of stuff again. And it's like, you just don't want to do it. And there's one really annoying scene where an earthquake has occurred in Iran, and it kind of screws everything up. Buildings fall over, and they're hunting for you. So you're crawling through this ditch, and you crawl into a pipe, and then a rat comes out and starts biting your hand. And if you don't hit the little button at exactly the right time, someone becomes aware of your presence, and then they shoot you and you die. And as you're dying, you actually give them the finger. So that, I guess there's a little bit of comedy to it or something. I had to go through this 3 times because each time I didn't hit that button right at the right time. And it's like 10 minutes of crawling, and then you get bit by a rat, and then you have to start over. And you're like, seriously? Like, it's just, it's so pointless.
Oh my God.
I just find things like that to be frustrating. So.
I had a couple questions for you from
Okay.
Actually, I had one question, not a couple, from a viewer that sent it in a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to be doing this. If you have any questions for Paul, because Paul knows everything.
Well,
everything. I'm just putting it out
what if they
there.
have questions for you? You might
No, nobody wants to talk
things.
to me. No, I know nothing. Well, if you have a question for either one of us, you can send it at guysfromqueens@gmail.com. You can send your questions there. And this question, actually, it was to both of us, but I think you would be able to explain it better. They were wondering if Ready Boost works.
Yeah, that's a good question. I I don't think so, based on my non-scientific.
It's like my friend had an old Toyota Camry, and there was a button that said overdrive.
Yeah,
that would make your car go faster.
Mm-hmm. So if
it's like
that
an
does that,
overdrive
why isn't that just not on all the time?
And it just never worked. I mean, it did nothing. It was supposed to give you like highway miles if you're driving 400 miles. So is it like one of those things where like, yeah, it gives you a little bit, but not really?
No, the type of system that you would use this on, like a netbook. Mm-hmm. Let's say you have a netbook and it's a 1 gigahertz single core Atom, and it has, whatever kind of hard drive it has, a much better performance boost for that machine would be buying an SSD, even though it's expensive. But you could get a USB stick, you could plug it into one of the ports, and then you could use that for ReadyBoost. I've done this, but I've never really seen dramatic enough of an improvement to bother with it. And then you have to have this thing sticking out of a laptop all the time. Yeah. Some Lenovo's and possibly some other systems use some Intel RAM, I guess you'd call it, that's inside the system that sort of does the same thing. And
yeah, it's like a backup. It kind of it actually,
like a turbo.
Yeah,
I forget what they call it, but that's fine. I mean, I kind of like the notion of that because it's inside the machine. But I guess my sort of general statement about ReadyBoost is that if you have a system that requires ReadyBoost, or you have a system that makes you think about ReadyBoost, you're not running a modern computer, and maybe you shouldn't be running Windows 7, or your needs are more than that machine can provide. That I think for a typical netbook of today with a dual core chip and 2 gigs of RAM and an SSD is more than enough for anyone who wants to do, Gmail and web browsing and some simple applications. But if you're running enough stuff and you're running out of resources on such a machine, you probably just need a better laptop. I mean, they have these laptops that are just a step up from a netbook that are, 100 times better for that kind of thing, and you would never need to use ReadyBoost.
I actually, I have a netbook here that I use it on, and I'll hold it up.
And you have the stick.
And it has an SD slot.
Oh, and you use SD. Okay.
And you could use SD now. I don't think in Vista you could, but in 7
you can. Yeah. So by the way, for whatever it's worth, that netbook I was talking about, I did do that as well. I just never saw do you see an improvement?
You know what? I don't know if it's like I
like
washed my
psychosomatic.
Yeah, like I just got a car wash, so my car is running. It has 20 horsepower or more. I don't know if it's one of those, but this is it's an IdeaPad from last year. So it's I think it's like a 1.6 gigahertz processor, single core. It's not a dual core. It's right before the dual cores came out.
Yep.
And it's a great little netbook, but it's slow.
Yeah.
I wiped everything out. I did a clean install. I upgraded because it had Home Edition of Windows. Mm-hmm. But no. What is it? Not Home Edition. What's
Starter?
The Starter. Yeah. So I upgraded that.
I saw a woman using that in the airport.
It's awful.
I wanted to just give her a key for like Home Premium and say, hey, you'll thank me for this later. But
here you go, ma'am.
Yeah, just please take.
What is this? You'll know what to do with it.
Yeah.
It's a great thing. It's a great laptop, but it's slow because it only has 1 gig of RAM.
That's not enough.
It doesn't have 2 gigs, so I put this thing in here. I could always upgrade the RAM, but
I do think a netbook from today with dual core, 2 gigs of RAM,
fast enough,
and an SSD, that'd be great.
Oh my God, yeah,
it'd be fine. Or not great, but it would be fine.
So I did all my bad habits that I have with Windows. I cleaned everything out from here. And is it 1 gig? Yeah, it's 1 gig. 1.6 gigahertz Atom N455. So it's not even the latest single core Atom. And I put that ReadyBoost stuff on there, and I have noticed that I could have more stuff running without it starting to slow down. Now, it's not going to help you if you have one application open and it's sucking up a lot. But if you have, let's say you have a web browser and you have your chat client open and you're starting to feel it, it'll help with that because it's additional.
Maybe that's a better way to look at it, that it's not so much a performance boost as it is almost like a capacity boost. And I think the other thing about ReadyBoost off the top of my head is that I believe it improves over time, based on what you're running, and that it gets to know what you tend to do, and it caches that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so if you're always running a certain combination of these browser windows and maybe this, Word or whatever, those things will be cached, and then they'll launch faster next time. And I suppose that there's some value to that. But, I just think for most people, if you're even the fact that you're considering ReadyBoost means maybe it's time to
upgrade. I mean, RAM is so inexpensive now. So the first thing I would say is try to upgrade your RAM. If your RAM is maxed out,
always do that first if you can. Yeah,
because it's so cheap. I mean, and so easy to change.
You want to start. You have a netbook. Maybe you've used it for a couple of years. It's getting kind of long in the tooth. I mean, SSDs are not inexpensive, but a 64 or 128 gig SSD would make such a huge improvement to a netbook. It would just be a big deal.
Yeah, so I like these Lenovo's actually, Paul, and there's a whole community on hacking these.
Is that like an IdeaPad S2?
Yeah, it's the S10.
S10.
I think it's the S10. Yeah, S10 III, because there's a tablet version of this.
Yep.
That I actually wanted. I don't know why. Jessica wanted. My wife wanted it because she thought it was a cool thing. I'm like, it's not going to be like an iPad.
No, it's
I'm
not.
just letting you know. You're going to have to use one of these on there and tap. It's a whole thing. But it's a nice little thing, and they actually overclock the machines, and they're able to swap out the Wi-Fi card and the video card, and doing all these hacks to this thing. I'm like, you could have bought something else at that point. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
People like to tinker. But Paul, it's that time again. We got to wrap up the show.
As we must.
It's always sad when this happens. But I was good. I didn't say everything I wanted to say. I held back, Paul. I really did.
Maybe that's best.
That is best. I want to remind everybody, go to our website, guysfromqueens.com. Let's go to a streaming site. You can watch live every week, every day. Pretty much we're on. A full schedule is on our website at gfqlive.tv. Paul broadcasts live every Thursday on Windows Weekly. That show that we're kind of beating with the numbers on the Zune.
Right.
On the Zune. I don't know if that's saying much.
Yeah, we're kicking ass on the Zune.
We're number one. Where? On the Zune. Okay. It's all right. How many people are using the Zune now, Paul? Do you know?
I have no idea.
A lot. A lot of people. That's what we're going to tell people.
Well, remember, it's not so much using the Zune. It's now they're using Windows Phone.
Do you have access to it on the Xbox?
It's a podcast.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
That is coming.
Okay.
Should ask Rob about that.
Yeah. I'll ask him. So check us out. And you can always send your emails to me or Paul. Paul also runs a great site called the Winsuper site, winsupersite.com. Very easy to read, Paul.
Thank you. Okay.
It doesn't. Well, I use it for a lot of my show notes now. I cheat and I just go to your site. I'm like, what is Paul writing about? I'm like, oh, that's a great story to use. Netflix drop, subscriber drop, which we didn't get to, but there's a lot. The Windows 8 paradox, very interesting.
Yeah, I was glad to finally write something about that. I've gotten some real goon emails about that. From people who just it's that the paradox is that power users are the ones that want everything to be the same. It's just weird to me.
But I mean, it's true because I'm one of those power users, so I'm gonna see what happens. But very interesting. WinSupersite.com. And again, Paul, thank you so much for joining me, and I thank all our viewers for joining us on this week's What the Tech. We'll see you all next week. Good night, everybody.